You've heard the phrase paradigm shift in corporate boardrooms, breathless software pitches, and motivational seminars. Over the last 60 years, it has been diluted into a generic marketing slogan for any minor change in logistics or strategy. The physicist and historian Thomas Kuhn actually coined the term, and as philosopher Boris Kriger details in his book How Knowledge Breaks and Remakes Itself, Kuhn spent the rest of his life watching in dismay as the world used his concept to sell breakfast cereal. Kuhn's original intent for the phrase had nothing to do with corporate synergy. He was describing a mechanism that replaces the comforting story we are all taught in school about how human knowledge grows. We are taught science is a ladder, one solid brick of fact cemented onto the last, steadily rising toward a complete picture of reality. Karl Popper added that scientists test bold guesses and discard the bad ones, projecting an unbroken climb toward a final truth. In 1947, a young Thomas Kuhn sat in a borrowed office trying to read Aristotle's ancient writings on motion. To modernize, Aristotle's physics looked like absolute nonsense. But Kuhn realized Aristotle was operating inside a different, internally consistent physical rulebook. His ideas were not clumsy approximations of modern gravity. They answered entirely different questions about the natural world. That realization suggested the history of science isn't a smooth climb. It's a series of disorienting lurches, nothing like the version taught in classrooms. For long stretches of time, a scientific field exists in what Kuhn called normal science. Most researchers aren't trying to overthrow reality. They are doing meticulous, clerical work to solve highly specific puzzles within a strictly agreed-upon rulebook. Because that work is so intense and precise, it eventually uncovers an observation that fails to fit the established rules of reality. Kuhn called this an anomaly. In November of 1895, the physicist Wilhelm Röntgen noticed a fluorescent screen glowing in his darkened lab when it should have been completely dark. Instead of assuming he made a mistake, he chased the glow until he was looking at this, the shadow of the bones inside his own hand, cast by an invisible ray. A single impossible observation rarely changes a field. When scientists encounter an anomaly, their first instinct is to assume the equipment is broken. They actively ignore it because their mental framework lacks a category for the new data. In a famous 1940s experiment, researchers flashed doctored playing cards, like a red six of spades. Subjects looked right at the red spade and confidently reported seeing a normal red heart. Their minds forced the visual data into expected categories. Scientific communities behave exactly the same way. They will tolerate, patch over, or ignore a massive flaw in their worldview for decades. Raw facts, no matter how glaring, rarely break a deeply held framework on their own. Eventually, an anomaly becomes too large to ignore. For 18th century chemists, the breaking point was burning metal. Their theory dictated that burning metals released phlogiston, meaning the residue had to weigh less. But burned metals consistently weighed more. Chemists even proposed that phlogiston had negative weight to save the theory. When desperate patches like negative weight begin failing, the science enters a state of crisis. The strict rules of normal science loosen. Experts begin debating the conceptual foundations they used to take for granted, searching for a radical new explanation. Then comes what Kuhn termed the gestalt switch. When a rival framework emerges, like the discovery of oxygen, the community begins to see the exact same data through a different lens. The world they inhabited is reorganized, and the old way of seeing becomes unrecoverable. This creates a treacherous gap known as incommensurability. Scientists operating in the old framework and the new one cannot effectively communicate. They are speaking different languages about different realities, unable to agree on what even counts as evidence. If the advancement of human knowledge is this combative and messy, involving rival camps who cannot talk to each other, why don't we remember it that way? Boris Kriger points out that science systematically rewrites its own history. This book, and thousands of textbooks like it, are not written to document the messy truth of the past. They exist to train new practitioners. By smoothing out the convulsions and erasing the fierce resistance, educational materials manufacture the myth of a clean, inevitable relay race. Science trades the messy truth for a functional myth to ensure the next generation can get to work without refighting the old battles. When Kuhn published these ideas, a kind of panic followed. Academics and the public worried. If science is just shifting paradigms, objective truth might merely be a passing cultural trend. This anxiety erupted in the 1990s during the science wars. Sociologists and cultural critics pushed Kuhn's ideas to extremes, adopting an anything-goes mentality. It escalated when physicist Alan Sokal published a paper of deliberate, jargon-filled nonsense in a respected journal, exposing how far standards of truth had fallen. But as Kriger argues, that panic was based on a misreading. Thomas Kuhn didn't destroy the validity of science, he humanized it. He revealed that knowledge is a collective achievement, built by communities making difficult judgments. We have to drop the idea that science is marching upward toward a perfect final blueprint of reality. Look at this tree. Kuhn suggested we view scientific progress like biological evolution. Science doesn't move toward a predetermined destination. It adapts, specializes, and terminates old frameworks when they can no longer survive new anomalies. Trusting science requires accepting that its current answers are not permanent. The ultimate strength of the scientific method lies exactly in its capacity to undergo traumatic structural breaks. Look at the deeply held certainties in your own profession or politics. You might be living inside a paradigm quietly waiting for its own anomaly.